Good evening to all our friends on Facebook, all our friends around the world. Good evening to all our friends in public policy, public administration. This is Reverend Dr. Aquilus Ricks coming to you live on our Zoom network for AfriH, Africans for the Restoration of Ethics in Government. We are a nonpartisan political organization that harnesses the expertise of professional Africans in the diaspora around the world on the continent of Africa to discuss issues significant to Africa and her future, and to dialogue how our respective careers, how respective expertise can be used to further Africa in terms of her development and social order on the continent of Africa. So we want to just say a big welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight, we're going to be having an interview with someone who is not a stranger to AfriH. He's someone we respect a lot, and he is a regular contributor to AfriH in terms of bringing questions and furthering the dialogue and the conversation we have on our platform with our interviewees. He is Dr. John McCarthy, and he is based in Canada. I'm going to read a summary of his professional experience for those of you who are not familiar with him, to have an idea who he is and what he does and what he brings to the table as we discuss Africa and the future of Africa. Dr. John McCarthy, professional work engagement span 15 years with 4 federal development departments and 1 Crown Corporation of the Core Public Administration of Canada. His work engagements have included coordinating and leading strategic operational planning, performance measurement, audit and evaluation, risk management, policy analysis and development files, and providing strategic advice to senior executives on a broad spectrum of public management issues, including results frameworks such as the program alignment architecture, performance measurement framework, performance indicators, logic model, work plans, investment plans, business continuity planning, investment in higher education, public opinion research, consultation plans, federal science expenditure data, UN Sustainable Development Strategy, Departmental Sustainable Development Strategy, and a range of public management strategies to enhance public sector governance and management. Before Dr. McCarthy's work engagements with the Canadian Public Service, he worked overseas with the government of Ghana and the Hunger Project International, a non-governmental organization. He is currently an advisor on strategic planning, performance measurement, and reporting with the Public Health Agency. His educational achievement: Dr. McCarthy holds a PhD and Master's of Philosophy in Public Policy and Administration from Walden University, USA, MPA from Carleton University, Canada, and BSc Honors from the University of Science and Technology, Ghana, West Africa. He has also obtained several certificates in public management, including project management, administrative regulation, managing in the public service, audit and evaluation in the public sector, emergency management, gender-based analysis, lean government, and performance management from theory to practice. His professional memberships include American Society of Public Administration, Canadian Institute of Public Administration, International Honor Society of Public Affairs and Administration, National Society of Leadership and Success, and the Golden Key International Honor Society. Dr. McCarthy, welcome to AfriH. Again, you're not a stranger to us, but we want to welcome you officially again to our platform. I'm sorry, you are muted.
Thank you, Dr. Ricks.
Amen. That's wonderful. Glad to have you with us. Tonight we're going to be talking about a subject that is dear to your heart, a subject that you have wealth of knowledge on, wealth of experience on, and a subject that we believe and you believe is essential to addressing Africa problems and the needs that Africa has. And that is social change and public policies. Social change and public policy. To begin with, what is social change, Dr. McCarthy, and why should we pay attention to it?
Well, thanks for having me. Social change and public policy, those are key concepts. And as a scholar practitioner, I have come to learn that social change, there is an intersect between social change and public policy. Briefly, social change can be defined as a way in which human interactions, relationship behavior patterns, and cultural norms change over time. These changes ultimately transform culture and social institutions. Also, the social change from my alma mater, Devon Nation, is that positive social change is a deliberating process of creating, applying ideas, strategies, action to promote the worth, dignity, and development of individuals, communities, organizations, institutions, cultures, and society. Positive social change result in improvement of human and social conditions. So briefly, from a labeling perspective and from a scientific research perspective, that's the definition of social change.
It's interesting because you highlighted this interaction concerning social order and the impact, that has on social order. Why do you think, in your own, expertise and just your knowledge in this area, why do you think that we as a people, now we're not even talking about Africa yet, but we as individuals, as a human race, why should we pay attention to social change?
Well, there are several reasons, but first, let me begin by saying social change is driven by individuals, or it can be driven by a group of individuals, or it can be driven by an institution. From an individual perspective, we can drive social change by supporting institutions that undertake initiative to bring about social change that I just mentioned, changing cultural norms and behavior over time, that results in some positive outcome for the whole of society. We can do that by providing financial support or research support to institutions that undertake such initiative. For instance, if you have an institution that is working towards social change in terms of deforestation, and you cannot get directly involved in that process, you can provide some funding to that institution to drive the change. From an organizational perspective, the biggest driver of social change are universities. And I use my own university as a case study. Universities undertake research, and these research fundings go a long way to impact social change. For instance, it might be some research that relate to the environment. Why there is deforestation, for instance, in West Africa. Those scientific fundings could serve as a basic for policymakers to use to formulate policies to address that issue of deforestation within the West African region. And that's the reason why most universities today are focusing on centering their research around social change, that the outcome of each research project should go towards influencing social change. And to a large extent, governments do drive social change as well. And as I said in my initial presentation, was that governments can drive social change through public policy. And as a scholar practitioner who has worked in both the developing world, the most effective way to drive social change is through public policy. And the reason is that public policy goes a long way to touch almost all of the population. And if it's instituted at the municipal level, those who live in that jurisdiction get affected. And they have to comply with the policy. And the policy goes a long way to make sure that behavior change takes place. For instance, we can talk about waste management. which is one of the key issues in West Africa, all across Africa. Those administrative regulations that drives waste management initiated within cities, if they are properly crafted and enforced, it could engender social change within the population, within that jurisdiction.
Wow, wow, wow. That's interesting. It's interesting because when you think about social change, as you just alluded, we're looking at, just in a layman term, changing society, changing society for the best, changing society for the better. And there's a lot of factors that come into play concerning this initiative. Now, I want to talk about something else. Let's look at the difference. Okay, first of all, should government be afraid of social change? Because when people hear social change, especially in the African context, it's like a red flag. It's like a red flag. Like this fear that suddenly develop. So should governments be afraid of social change?
No, the government should not be afraid of social change. Social change is intended to bring some progress and improvement to society, to a country as a whole. One thing that concerns me across Africa is the issue of corruption. And unless there is some social change that is instituted through public policy, the issue of corruption remains. And once the issue of corruption remains, there is no progress in human society. There is no progress in a country. And it's not an issue that is restricted to one jurisdiction. All across the continent is an issue. And the issues are different levels. From country to country, you realize that the level of corruption is either low, medium, or very high. And if we don't drive change, positive social change through public policy, growth and development will be stagnated. And I gave you an example as to how we can drive that change. Government have to formulate public policy in consultation with stakeholders. Not just formulating those policies, but there has to be a mechanism through which the policy is enforced. And I gave an example of waste management, deforestation, and I've come to corruption. Somebody asks how do you drive such change through public policy? If public policy are properly crafted and implemented, they drive social change, they force compliance. So as leaders, it's something that we need to consider, because having worked in the developed world, I realized that human institutions are human institutions. And until you craft the right kind of policy that ensures compliance to certain guidelines, employees within public sector would not just submit, to those kind of change. So it has to be driven by either public policy at the national level, at the municipal level, or at the local or state level as well.
It's interesting because some people will argue, and I think there's this debate, or there's this discussion concerning who should be responsible for initiating this social change when you talk about policy. And when you think about it, it's the burden on the policymaker or the government, or is the burden on the society and the members of the citizen society to express, to leadership, the needs existing on the local level. Because sometimes it's easy, if you have a group of people living on a farm, or living in a rural area, or living in a community, well, those people know exactly, the issues that they're faced with. They know exactly the challenges they are faced with. And sometimes it's left with them, to be proactive in bringing that concern to leadership or to government. So in your view, or in your estimation, where do you think the burden lies? Is it government, it's left with the government to be proactive in, we talked about research, a few weeks ago, in conducting research in different areas to identify the needs, or is it, left, the burden of proof is left with the citizens or the locals to reach out to government and say, this is what we are experiencing, We need change in this area. We need a social change in this area. I mean, how will you view and how will you address that, concerning, is the burden on the government or is it burden on the citizens, to initiate the whole idea of social change?
Well, as I said initially, social change should not be restricted just to government, instituting public policy change. It can start with individuals. Individuals who see the need for change can undertake initiative to ensure that there is change in society. And I gave an illustration as to how individuals can also support this initiative. During my doctoral research, I came across a case study of Hong Kong. Hong Kong being, a metropolitan area where, there were no trees, there were no parks. So one of our scholar practitioners from our university, upon her graduation, decided to initiate some social change in Hong Kong. And she started by finding ways and engaging citizens within the city as to how they could start tree planting and creating mini gardens. But there was no space at all. So she started going to schools and creating green spaces within school. So that started to grow and spread all across the city. So that's an individual, with a mindset of social change. And as I said, there are institutions, right? Groups that drive social change. For example, those who advocate for women's rights. If you are not directly involved, you could support that through providing funding to those groups. Or people who, institutions that support, homeless people, for instance. You provide some financial support to those institutions that drive those change within their own jurisdiction. As I said before, as a scholar practitioner, the most effective way we can drive change and exponential change in the short term is through public policy. And it can be at the local level, and I can give an instance. I was following on development from Liberia quite recently, where new infrastructure had been built, but those infrastructure in days have been polluted, and those who use those facilities cannot even use the facilities, all because there are no regulations in place, and all because regulations are not being enforced. Because it's one thing to draft regulation, but it's another thing to enforce those regulations altogether. So if we want to exponentially drive social change, I think government should take a lead. Individuals can do their part, in a small way to drive change. But government has a greater responsibility to ensure that change, takes place through public policy.
Wow, it's amazing because just gathering from what you said, so in other words, I mean, there has to be at some point this partnership between government and citizens. Obviously, government should take the lead. We understand that, but at some point, citizens or individuals seeing a need, and I'm glad you made that illustration concerning Hong Kong. I mean, just to think where Hong Kong is now. I mean, just this massive metropolitan, city that people travel over the world to see the beauty and the splendor. I mean, just imagine that they didn't have those kind of trees and those things in the initial stage of their development, but it took one individual, who got educated and who got trained and whose eyes were open to that social need to go and begin to become more productive and just get involved, and help the community develop in that area. So that's very admirable. And I think Africa can learn from that. I think Africa can learn from that. We do know that as I said, there's this concern, there's a red flag when we come to Africa, when you hear social change. I think most times the focus is just on change, and so people kind of, get panic, and there's this defeat threatened, and this red flag comes up. And I'm glad you alluded that there should not be a fear of social change. It's simply, positioning the community or the nation for a better future, but let's talk about this thing, because what is the difference between social change and social disorder? Because again, there's this fear that people will have, that they're talking about change, and so social change is completely different from social disorder. Just to clarify, could you elaborate a little bit concerning the difference between that?
Well, the difference is that change, in the layman's term, change occurs continuously. And that's the reason why we added the word positive social change. Change occurred in society at all levels, and those change can either be negative or positive change. For instance, if we just remove government, just for the sake of removing government, and then the conditions of the people worsen over time, that's not a positive social change. Positive social change is that a change that bring about some positive outcome over time. And we have to be keen on that. We shouldn't just request change for the sake of change. If we want to get rid of corruption, how do we do it? Do we just do it by changing government? Do we consider properly vetting those we bring to public office? And we can properly vet those individuals through elections. And elections can also be, influenced through social change. And social change can come about through advocacy and education, right? So, it's a broad spectrum issue that we need to look at critically in Africa, especially as it relates to corruption. You can't just change government and say, well, we have changed now, and so things going to improve. It just doesn't work that way. Do we carefully vet those who come to office in terms of their character, in terms of their records, in terms of priors, that is their orientation, their educational orientation, their society orientation, what has been their role in society, or we just don't care. And given the population across Africa, there is a need to drive this kind of change through advocacy and education. And I can give an example of Liberia. People vote not on issue, people vote not on character. They just vote because they want change. And if we just vote because we want change, we tend to move the country backwards instead of forward. So that's the difference in just, having a change that leads chaos and having a change that leads to growth and positive outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Thank you for clarifying. I think it's essential for the layman, what we call the common man, so to speak, or the citizens of a nation, especially in Africa, to understand we're not talking about social chaos or disorder. We're talking about change that will improve living conditions, change that will enhance the productivity of the nation, and change that will lead to infrastructure development and better the lives of the people of the nation. And I'm glad that you even mentioned that how we do those things is through a democratic process, through voting, through vetting, and getting the right people in public service, in public office. Thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit concerning policies. Okay, I know you kind of mentioned earlier, but how does public policy impact social change?
Well, in various ways. What is at a state, federal, local, and municipal level, public policy influence positive social change in various ways. And I give you some classic examples. For instance, we talk about corruption. If you want to drive change, positive social change and corruption, you need to have policy in place that ensures that people don't have direct access to financial resources. If you just draft a policy that says that, well, we will punish those who engage in corruption, that would not stop corruption. So we need some level of understanding in terms of scientific research, in terms of expertise to be able to drive that change. Because those who craft the policy, they have to craft those policy, whether it's at the municipal or federal level, in such a way that it enforces compliance. And having as a scholar practitioner who have worked in the developed and developed world, the difference is that in the developed world, you don't see financial resources. You want to see them on papers, right? And the reverse being, in Africa, people have direct access to cash. And then you have an anti-corruption commission established through public policy. You have some ethics that is not enforced. So all of those things it makes it redundant it makes it a non-starter that you have these policies, but they are not crafted and designed in such a way that they will force compliance, right? And a case study all across West Africa, someone can walk into the bank with $1 million check, a government check of $1 million and just in cash. And there is no regulation that says that banking institutions that encash $1 million check upfront will be prosecuted or will be held liable. So financial transaction is too physical. You know, in the developing world, you know, for instance, if I have $5 million as my budgetary allocation, I just see on papers. And if I'm to sign anything beyond a certain amount, it has to go be above me and keeps going above me. And all of those things, those are control mechanisms to make sure that corruption don't take place, because every institution, whether in the developed or developing world, is a human institution. Wherever you have a human institution, there are human flaws. There's a tendency for people to mismanage. And the only way to control that is to make sure that you have you know, a very comprehensive public policy that ensures that people don't have direct access to cash. But if the funds get used, even if the corporate goes to jail, that would not, you know, he might not be able to restitute the funds that has been made appropriated. And that negatively impacts society and the country as a whole.
For those of you joining us, this is AfriH, Africans for the Restoration of Ethics in Government. We come alongside government to help them do the right thing in Africa. I'm with Dr. John McCarthy. You know, Dr. McCarthy, we look at Africa right now. We have a concern. I personally have a concern. You know, the genesis of AfriH, you know, sprung out of a concern for our continent. We look around the world. We look at, you know, the West, America, Europe, even look at Asia, and we look around the world. We see all these developments going on. We see different policies in place that just, I mean, people have retirement savings. People have, you know, they can go on vacation, just see the beauty of this world. You know, they have regular, you know, within a year. I mean, I know like here in the US, in a year, you have a 2-week, you know, vacation, you know, that you can utilize just for yourself and just to, you know, see these things. And these are, you know, as you mentioned, these are all social changes that took place because, you know, when you think about America, you know, in the history of America, where I am right now, you know, it's interesting that she didn't start like this, where she is right now. She didn't start like this. You know, she started like, you know, like every other nation from scratch, so to speak. But over time, we saw laws and we saw, you know, policies being framed and the key word that you mentioned, implemented by government that really restructured this entire nation to where she is today. And we can say, you know, the most powerful nation in the world. You know, young Americans, people, you know, work, you can go to vacation all over the world and, you know, see, you got money, you got savings, you got businesses, small, you know, all these things as a result of policies that was just put on the books and just followed through, you know, implemented. I have a burden for Africa. And as a professional African, you know, with the expertise you have, let's bring it home. What for you right now, you know, with your assessment of Africa now and your knowledge in this era of policy, what do you think is the most, now again, this is tricky because I know it's a vast array of things, but where would you try to narrow this down that Africa can start, you know, to begin to turn you know, to make a turn, you know? I know it's vast. There's so many issues we have, so many areas, but which area of policy you think, you know, where can we start? You know, what would you say? What's the starting point to turn Africa around?
During the last presentation here, I mentioned that we need to start with government, but we also need to start as individuals also. As individuals, there is a need for us to start identifying those areas we think, you know, we should be supporting positive social change. some of which is happening now. You have individuals who lead and try to educate our people on issue regarding the environment, issue regarding, like I have, one of our colleagues who left the United States, he's in Monrovia, and he's trying to drive change through interviews, through video documentaries. He goes around, each regarding sanitation, each regarding the environment, and issue regarding drug abuse. He's involved in all of that. That government cannot take all of the initiative to do that. So those kind of initiative, we need to support it, because when we address issue of drug abuse, abuse of the environment, we are doing it for ourselves because we live in the same environment. But to a large extent, the central issue in Africa has been corruption. And we have to find a way, not just to change the government, because if you have the right leaders in place and you have those leaders crafting the right kind of policy, it affects, a much more larger segment of the population as compared to just, affecting 10, 50 people. You can build homes for 10 women. That's fine. But why not curb corruption, with the intent that government will increase revenue, with the intent that government will be forthcoming with most of these social programs, not just to help 10 people, 20 people, but to help the entire population. I mean, in terms of creating jobs, right? Today, if I use Liberia as an example, this $500 million in budget. But in real terms, we should be like possibly generating $5 billion in revenue, all because of leakage. And it's all because there's no policy in place to ensure that people don't have direct access, to cash. There's no policy in place that prevents revenue collectors from moving from organization to organization, from business to business, and collecting cash that ends up elsewhere instead of government revenue. So if, for instance, there is a financial policy that ensures that payments of government revenue is done through electronic systems, whereas, taxes and all of that automatically goes into government revenue, we can track it. It's going to take time because the informal sector is quite huge. But what of those institutions such as banks, such as hotels, such as car rentals, such as department stores that could possibly, introduce electronic payment system, whereas, taxes are collected upfront and just transferred to government revenue. We could possibly increase our revenue intake 3 times in Africa if we introduce this kind of system. And, a policy that also prevents direct cash, from exchanging hands could also help, minimize the level of corruption we have. And if corruption is reduced and revenues get increased, it means our children's economic programs get well funded. And each regarding roads and hospitals and education could possibly be overcome in the short to medium term.
Quite informative, quite informative. To those online with us, Dr. McCarthy, we can take some questions from you. If you want to just go in the chat room and just type in your questions, we'll present them to him. Again, I'm Reverend Dr. Aquilus Ricks with AfriH. So for you, Dr. McCarthy, there's hope for Africa, right?
Yes, there is hope for Africa. And I think that governments in Africa, we have, a large pool of African professionals, who have worked and obtained academic qualifications in the development world. So we understand both worlds, and we understand how some of these issues can be addressed. So my own advice to African government is that look out there, identify aspects, some aspects who possibly are even prepared to provide pro bono service, to help improve, how the system works in Africa, through the education they have obtained in the institution in which they have worked. Not trying to downplay those who would serve in most of these institutions, but experience matters. You can't bring people to public service who have little or no experience. In a developed world, it just doesn't work that way. You can enter as a policy analyst and try to work your way through. You can't come with zero experience from grad school and become Minister of Finance. I mean, there is no way you're going to craft, economic policy that will move the country forward, because you just don't understand the variables that should come together to ensure growth and development. And it's just factual. So we should be encouraging African governments to look out there, by through the Senior Executive Service Program that came to being after the conflict in Liberia. So many aspects of Liberian origin went home to help. Such programs should continue. What it has to do with the environment, what it has to do with cutting corruption, what it has to do with a functional judiciary. There are experts who have the know-how as to how to put in place measures, through administrative regulations to make sure that these institutions function properly.
I got a question from you from one of our attendees here. And the question is, how can Africa be more green in order to sustain its natural resources? So you're talking about policy concerning the whole, becoming green, how can we become more green to sustain our natural resources?
As you said, Dr. Riggs, in a developed world, there are administrative regulations on the environment. And, having studied law and public policy, I did a lot of papers on administrative regulation related to the environment. Again, one way to control that is through public policy. You can just have people randomly, engage in deforestation, and there is no way there are no guidelines to ensure that there's reforestation, right? And it's not just saying that people should not engage in logging, right? You have to enforce it. And how do you enforce it? You have to make sure that those who are responsible for enforcement are properly vetted. They are properly vetted, and there has to be some level of punishment as is done in the developed world. If you engage in activities that degrade the environment, you are prosecuted for that. And until that is done, until we enforce the law regarding environmental regulations, we wouldn't go anywhere. And that's the reason why I indicated that who enforces the law? To ensure that the law gets enforced, you have to have credible people in office. You have to have people with such proper public ethics. They will not compromise, they will not take bribe or grift because someone is degrading the environment and they want to enrich themselves at the expense of the state, right? If you go to Liberia today, you go to Eastern Liberia, there are people engaged in surface mining. But who controls that? Is there a policy that says that people should not engage in surface mining? And if you go across Africa, there are regulations. For instance, I school in Ghana and I work in Ghana as well. You cannot engage in surface mining in Ghana just like that. There are regulations that prohibit that, and those who engage in that will be arrested and prosecuted. So people have been fully aware of that would not engage in activities that degrade the environment. So crafting a policy that prevents certain things from happening will go a long way, but it has to be enforced as well. And the issue is that in most countries across Africa, enforcement remains the issue. 42% of remaining rainforest is in Liberia, but is a forest that being preserved. There's a policy that says that no logging, because a European country is providing funding to make sure that we sustain that remaining rainforest. But you may have some leaders who come to office and say, no, we would not comply with those regulations. We will engage in logging. So that's the importance of enforcement. Regardless of who is in office, we have to enforce our regulations.
Wow. Quite informative. Well, folks, Apparently, our audience are pretty much digesting everything you're saying, so they have a lot of questions. But pretty much, that brings us, to our segment with Dr. McCarthy on social change and public policy. It's always a joy and a pleasure to have him with us. As I mentioned in the beginning, that he's a regular contributor to what we do here. You will see him again, oftentimes he's with us throwing questions to our interviewees, so you will see him again. And hopefully we'll get him back to in the near future to do a segment where he will only just teach. We're not interviewing him, but we'll just allow him to teach for half an hour on subject concerning public policy to our audience. Again, thank you, Dr. McCarthy, for being with us. Any concluding thought before we let you go?
Well, briefly, though, social change is cardinal. It's an imperative for growth and development in any country. Without social change, whether it's in the health sector, whether it has to do with education, whether it has to do with the judicial system, we cannot move forward. And as I said before, as a scholar practitioner who has worked in both the development and developing world, it's very important that we craft public policy that drives exponential change, positive change. And we should not just engage in change for the sake of change. We shouldn't just draft public policy and also fall short of implementing and enforcing those regulations. If that is done, and if there is a gap in expertise in Africa, I think we have more than enough experts and professionals and scholars from the continent who reside in the West. An African government could use their expertise to be able to drive positive social change in terms of drafting public policy and putting in place mechanisms to ensure effective control in most of our sector.
We'll leave it there, folks, for now. Dr. McCarthy, John McCarthy from Canada, sharing his expertise in public policy, how it can benefit Africa. We want to thank all our members, our partners, and those of you with us tonight. Thank you for joining us in this segment with Dr. McCarthy. Please remember and know that all these segments, by the end of the day, it will be uploaded on our YouTube page. So you just go to YouTube and type in AfriEdge. Is there that you can share with your friends. We encourage you to pass the word along that AfriEdge is here. Professional Africans for the restoration of ethics in government. We are here to come alongside and provide counsel and expertise to African leaders, African governments, how to get improve conditions on the continent of Africa and make Africa better. Thank you again for your time. Dr. McCarthy, you have a good evening. And thank you, everybody. I will leave you again with the motto of this organization: doing better by doing right. Africa can do better if she simply does right. Good night, everybody. See you next time.